Shavua Tov, the last week of 5780, a year that we're probably anxious to say goodbye to. Okay, so is it okay if I speak right from here? I want to get both those who are joining us virtually and those who are here and present. You guys can all see me okay online? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, great. So this evening's lecture, for a change, is going to be about Selihot, which I'm really happy about. Sometimes we'll take sort of a side topic and try and make this evening a little bit more popular. But I thought that this year, it might be nice for a particular reason that I'll explain, to delve into one of the most important aspects of Selihot, and that is the unusual time when it is recited. Usually, unless it's the middle of the summer, by now the shul is closed. There are no services at 9 p.m., never mind 10 p.m., never mind 11 p.m. This service technically is supposed to take place in the middle of the night. And some of you might know that Selihot is not a one-night thing, right? We do Selihot here, a service that we call Selihot, but what it actually is the first night of Selihot. Selihot is supposed to be recited the entire week preceding Rosh Hashanah, before Shacharit services, even before the sun rises. You hurry and rush to shul in order to recite the Selihot prayers. And actually, the reason why we don't do that tonight, that the only reason why we don't wait until tomorrow morning to recite the Selihot prayers is because we're showing God that we're anxious, we are in a hurry to begin. We don't want to wait. So as soon as possible, that is, as soon as this last week of the year begins, we rush to have this service. That is the meaning of the first source that you have on your page, which is the first 5 words of the famous piyut, the famous poem that is recited in our liturgy only tonight. B'motza'ei menucha kidamnucha techila. What's motza'ei? This is called motzei Shabbat now. B'motza'ei menucha. Menucha is rest. So it's just another word for Shabbat. B'motzei Shabbat, on the eve of Shabbat, kidamnucha techila. The first thing we do is rush to come before you. And I think that this year, the sense that we have of this being an unusual time to have this service has implications for what this year has done to our routines in life, to what we regard as being the usual, the normal way we do things, and how life has shaken our view of what those things might be. This lecture that I'm going to be giving tonight is sort of an adaptation of a lecture that was given decades ago by a rabbi named Yehuda Amital. Harav Amital, as he's known, Rav Amital, his 10th yahrzeit was commemorated just about a month ago. That's another reason why I wanted to give this lecture. I thought it was not only topical, but also a nice way to commemorate Rav Amital's yahrzeit. And for those of you who don't know Rav Amital, I printed out just some remarks that I'd like to share with you to give you an appreciation of his incredible life. What's unique, by the way, about him that is pertinent to Beth Tikva. He was born in the same town where Tibi is from in Romania. He's from Oradea. That's where he was born in 1924. He studied Torah in Cheder and Yeshiva with virtually no formal secular education. In 1944, with the Nazi invasion of Hungary, that city, Oradea, where Tibi is from, at one point it was Hungary. It was not Romania then. That's why Tibi speaks fluent Hungarian. He was taken to a labor camp. His entire family were taken to Auschwitz, where they were murdered. His parents, his sister, and his brother. He was the sole survivor. After his liberation, he arrived in Eretz Israel. And when he arrived, he continued his studies at the Hebron Yeshiva, and he joined the Haganah. He fought in the War of Independence, in the battles of Latrun, and in the Galilee. And after the war, he became a rabbinic secretary in Rehovot, and then an instructor in a place called Yeshivat Hadarom. Rav Amital predicted that the phenomenon of yeshiva students being exempted from army service would increase friction between the religious and secular community. That's sort of obvious now, but he saw it happening early on. He also felt that the religious Zionist community needed to have its own institutions of high-level Torah study, and helped formulate the idea of a Hester Yeshiva. I don't know if you've heard of a Hester Yeshiva, but students who go to Hester Yeshivot not only learn Torah, but also serve in the army. Before this time, if you wanted to study in a yeshiva in Israel, they were mostly anti-Zionist. And the idea that the yeshiva student would also serve in the army would be blasphemy, right? There are still such places today. But he was part of this movement to create a religious Zionist yeshiva, which comes from his own life. You can hear about his own story, right? No secular education at all, but yet proudly serving in the War of Independence and also in the highest offices of what you would call the Rabbanut, of the religious offices of the country. After the Six-Day War, he was called upon to create one of those Hester yeshivas in Gush Etzion. And in 1968, that yeshiva opened. It is not far, if you know the area, from of a place called Alon Shvut. It started with 30 students, and it has since grown into an institution with hundreds of students from Israel and abroad, a women's division called Migdal Oz, and a very respected teachers college. The yeshiva is open to a variety of opinions and approaches. That was important to Rav Amital. He insisted that the yeshiva be staunchly committed to Torah study and mitzvah observance, but also be built with windows, he said. In other words, sensitive to the needs of the outside world. What's interesting is that after Prime Minister Rabin of blessed memory was assassinated in 1995, he was asked by Shimon Peres to join the government as a minister without portfolio. And he was asked to join the government because he was seen as a figure that could bridge the growing divides between the religious and secular communities in Israel. And he did that, and that was his job in that very short government of Shimon Peres. He retired in October 2008. As I said, his 10th yahrzeit was commemorated last month. And today, Yeshivat Har Etzion is probably his greatest legacy to the Jewish people. It remains that institution that he founded and guided for all those decades, an incredible place where not just Torah is being learned, but a particular philosophy of Torah, that openness to the outside world and the importance of also being a part of Israeli society and serving in the IDF. I tell you all of this about Rav Amital because you're going to see as we go through some of his lecture how some of his worldview appears in the sources that he cites, in the picture that he wants to paint for his students as they are preparing many decades ago to begin the Selihot service. This is more or less, with some changes and emendations by me, more or less the message he gave them. The message he gave is to pay attention to when this service is happening. This custom of saying Slichot, as I said this morning at services, goes back 1,000, 1,500 years since the time of what are known the Geonim, but it's not only the custom of saying Slichot that goes back that long, it's also this unusual time where when they are supposed to be recited. As I was saying, Motzei Shabbat, where typically there is no gathering, and in the early hours of the morning before the Shacharit service, also when there is no gathering. This is a departure from the norm, and that is meant to give us a message. And I would submit that that the message of this service, the message of when it takes place is, you cannot fully engage in the process of tshuva, in the process of cheshbon hanefesh, examining where we are in our lives. You cannot fully engage and answer that question unless you separate from the routines. This service is at an abnormal time to shake us, to make us aware that something isn't right. What are we doing in shul on Saturday night? This isn't a time we're supposed to be in shul. And the same way we need to shake ourselves a week before Rosh Hashanah. Because if we just go along living our lives out of habit, doing what we always do, not finding a way to get a different perspective on our decisions and our lives, we won't fully be able to reflect. We won't fully have a picture of ourselves that we can study in this process of cheshbon hanefesh, of examining the soul. Where do we learn of the danger of routines? Well, one of those sources is found here in your source sheet from the Babylonian Talmud, tractate Chagiga. Let's read this source. Bar Heihei said to Hillel. I don't know who named their kid Bar Heihei, but it makes this memorable. What is the meaning of that which is written? Then you shall again discern between the righteous and the wicked, between he who serves God and he who does not serve him. So the Talmud opens up here with a question. Malachi, you know, is one of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible. And there's a verse in the book of Malachi that says, God will discern between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and those who don't. What is the Talmud's question about this verse? We'll read what it says. There are two redundancies here. This seems redundant. What's redundant about it? Well, the righteous is the same as the one who serves God, and the wicked is the same as the one who does not serve God. In other words, Malachi should have said, then you shall again discern between the righteous and the wicked, period. Why did he feel the need to add between those who serve God and those who don't? So this is a very common question in rabbinic literature. The truth is, if I was a biblical scholar, I would tell you the reason why it says, why there's this extra half of the sentence the wicked, the wicked and the good, those who don't serve and those who do, that's called parallelism, biblical parallelism. It's poetry. You're just using the same, you're using poetry to repeat and emphasize a point, right? But that's not an answer that's acceptable to the rabbis. For them, every word has to give something new, has to have some new meaning. So there must be something different between someone who's righteous and someone who serves God. Those are not the same thing. And there must be something different between someone who's wicked and someone who does not serve God. Those are also not the same thing. So what is the Talmud going to say is the difference between the two? Hillel said to him, the one who serves him and the one who does not serve him are both referring to completely righteous people. That's interesting. You can be a righteous person, but not serve God. That's what Hillel is saying. Well, that should be surprising, right? How can you be called righteous, but not serve God? But the verse is hinting at a distinction between them. Okay, so what is the difference? As one who reviews his studies 100 times is not comparable to one who reviews his studies 101 times. Wow, that is cryptic. So the righteous person who is wicked, or excuse me, the righteous person who does not serve God reviews his studies 100 times. The righteous person who does not serve God reviews his studies 100. Okay, hold on. Let me repeat this. I'm getting lost in the metaphors here. The righteous person who serves God reviews his studies 101 times, that extra time. The righteous person who does not serve God only reviews his studies 100 times. What is this about? Bar-Hehe said to him, due to one extra time that he did not review, the verse says that he is one who does not serve him. Hillel said, yes. Go and learn from the market of donkey drivers. One can hire a driver to travel up to 10 parasangs for 1 dinar. However, he will travel 11 parasangs only for 2 dinars. This shows that any departure beyond the norm is considered a significant difference. Now, some of us, a modern interpretation, by the way, of what that says, do you know if you order pizza at Tovli, they say, we'll deliver the pizza between Bayview and Dufferin, but not outside of that quadrant. Do you remember there's a great Seinfeld episode, actually, where Elaine is ordering Chinese food. I'm thinking of it now. Did anyone see that episode where Elaine orders Chinese food and they won't deliver to the north side of 86th Street, only to the south side of 86th Street? That's the border. So she has to pretend that she lives in an apartment on the south side of the street. It's a fantastic episode. And that's the modern, that equivalent of the parasangs of the donkey driver. That side of the street, the north side of 86th Street, is like the 101st time. It's beyond the normal, beyond the boundaries. So we're learning from Hillel a lesson about routines according to Rav Amital. For Tovli, it's their boundary. For the Chinese restaurant in New York, it's their boundary. That's what they're used to. That's their routine. That's their 100 times. 100 is a round number. If you're reviewing your studies 101 times, 100 times, it means that you've probably done that out of habit. It's unlikely that it just happens to be 100 times out of the blue until you understand the material. You probably have an approach that, well, in order for me to really understand this passage, I need to review it 100 times and then I'm done. But 101 times, that means you're reviewing the material until you know it. Are you understanding a bit of where this is coming from? If you cross the street to deliver the Chinese food on North 86th Street, it means you made an extra effort. If Tovli goes beyond Bayview Avenue, they've gone outside of what is normal. And so for Rav Amital, and I think it's true, the lesson of this passage is you can be a righteous person, but if you're doing the same thing in the same neighborhood, that's all you know. You never leave. You never examine. You never try and do something different. You never walk one street further, study a source one more time. You're not serving God. You want to serve God and call yourselves righteous? Be careful never to turn your religious life, your academic life, your personal life into habits. Don't become a machine that can't operate outside of the normal boundaries in which you operate. This quote from Malachi, I'd like us to look at it. If you'll turn the page on the top of page 2, you can see the context of that verse from Malachi. And it's actually part of a bigger discussion or a bigger theme, not just about someone who serves God and someone who doesn't. You have spoken arrogantly against me, says the Lord. That's how it starts, the 3rd chapter of Malachi, verse 13. You have spoken arrogantly against me. Who's God talking to? The people. So God is saying to the people, you've said some things that are very arrogant. What did they say? Yet you ask, what have we said against you? So God sees what you're saying as arrogant, but the people don't recognize that there's anything wrong with what they're saying. So now Malachi is going to explain. You have said it is futile to serve God. What do we gain by carrying out his requirements and going about like mourners before the Lord Almighty? But now we call the arrogant blessed. Certainly evildoers prosper. Even when they put God to the test, they get away with it. So let me ask the people who are in this room. Try and understand what the people are saying. God says, you've spoken arrogantly against me. The people say, no, we haven't. What have they said? What's their complaint to God? Look at the words. It is futile to serve God. What do we gain by carrying out his requirements? Now, this is a charge that I think I've heard once or twice or many more times from Jews all the time. Why should I do the mitzvot? What do I gain from this? My life stinks, and it stinks before I keep Shabbat and after I keep Shabbat, and it's getting worse and worse. But I see my neighbor, and my neighbor, he's the biggest jerk that you could imagine. And he keeps making more money and being more successful. And what is this religion all about? I thought religion was about doing good deeds and serving God in order for us to get some reward. And yet all around they see people, right? It says, certainly evildoers prosper, even when they put God to the test. Right? You could imagine, what does that mean, putting God to the test? It means, I'll steal from this guy. Let's see if God Let's see if God catches me. Even when they put God to the test, they get away with it. That's their charge. Now, this is no wonder, right? Malachi says these are some heavy words. The people are saying, we don't want to be Jewish anymore because we're not getting anything out of this. There's no benefit to us of carrying out the mitzvot and having this relationship. So what happens? Let's keep reading. Then those who feared the Lord talked with each other, and the Lord listened and heard. A scroll of remembrance was written in his presence concerning those who feared the Lord and honored his name. On the day when I act, says the Lord Almighty, they will be my treasured possession. I will spare them just as a father has compassion and spares his son who serves him. And you will again see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and those who do not. What does God respond to this complaint, or Malachi speaking on behalf of God? Well, this is actually a theme that's very relevant for the high holidays. There's a scroll of remembrance. In the Hebrew, it's Sefer Zikaron, right? God says, oh no, you think I don't see what's going on? You think that I don't see the wicked and what they're doing, and the righteous and the way the righteous are going about their lives? I have it all written down. It's in my Sefer Zikaron. Right? That's a metaphor for God sees and knows it all. That's the reassurance that Malachi is giving the people. And on the day that I act, in other words, there will come a time, don't lose hope. There will come a time where you will see the difference between those who serve and those who don't serve, and those who are good and those who are evil. The sages interpret this whole story of what's going on here in the scene in Malachi, not as our ancestors acting out of defiance. They're not saying to God, we're sick of Judaism, we're sick of following all the mitzvot, just let us do whatever we want to do. According to the sages, they are acting out of pain and sadness. It hurts them that they're not seeing the benefit in what they're doing. It hurts them that their observance of Shabbat doesn't do anything for them. It hurts them that keeping kosher doesn't give them a better life. It hurts them to see all these other people who are happy and don't have to abide by all of those rules. In other words, they are tired of the rituals that are becoming routine. They're tired not just of God not giving them a reward, but of themselves not seeing some benefit in the way they're living their lives. Their performance of the mitzvot does nothing for them. It's just robotic. It's ritual without any kavanah, we say, without any intention. For these people, ritual has lost its power, its vitality, and that's why they say, we have gained nothing, right? And that's God's response. Don't worry, there will come a day where we'll distinguish between those who act and those who don't act, and those whose ritual is real and those whose ritual is not real. Now, if you blend this source with what we learned in the Talmud, right? Looking at the context of these verses in Malachi, you get a better picture of what we're supposed to learn about Bar-Hei and Hillel's exchange. The one who studies the 100th time versus the one who studies the 101st time. And according to Rav Amital, it's a message that clearly is meant to scare us. Um, to scare us and to warn us about our ritual lives becoming too normal, too routine, not doing things differently than what we've done before. And again, that's why Slichot is done at a different time. It is done outside of the ordinary hours of prayer. This is Motzei Shabbat. We just said Havdalah together. It's not just that this is an unusual time, it's also Motzei Shabbat, a very unique time in the week. We are between Kodesh and Chol. That's the blessing that I said, the last blessing of Havdalah, Hamavdil ben Kodesh lechol. Thank you, God. You are the one who distinguishes between holy and profane. Now, holy and profane, Shabbat and Chol, is not just about days of the week, right? It doesn't say that only Shabbat is Kodesh. We have in our lives moments throughout the week that are Kodesh, holy moments. You see your child accomplish something wonderful. That's a holy moment, right? You finish a book that you always wanted to read. That's a holy moment. And in between, we have chol. We have the routine, getting dressed, waking up, making breakfast. For most of us, it's the same breakfast every single morning. And there's, I think, some meaning, not just in the fact that this is an unusual time for prayer, but this is Motzei Shabbat, a time in between the holy and the profane. Why? Because sometimes we look at our lives and think that we haven't accomplished much, and we have a negative view of the way this past year has been. We say it's been a year of chol, normal, boring, nothing special happened to me this year. And there are other people who say, no, this year was a year of kodesh. Everything went great. I had enormous growth. Everything changed for the better. And that's not the real taste of life. Remember what Maimonides says about tshuva. He says, every person should regard himself or herself as a Beinoni, in between. Every person should think that their fate hangs in the balance of one good deed. That's how you're supposed to approach Rosh Hashanah. Nobody should come into this holiday saying, I had a great year, I'm good to go. Or I had a terrible year, there's nothing I can do. Everyone should see themselves as in between, and if they say one more thing, one more positive thing, or do one more positive mitzvah, it'll tilt the scales, hopefully, in your favor. That is another reason why this is the perfect time to say Slichot, right? We are in an in-between time during the week. A Beinoni time between what is holy and between what is profane. How are we supposed to examine ourselves? How are we supposed to look at our lives in the past year? Let's look at a source on the bottom of page 2 that might help us to begin the process of Cheshbon HaNefesh that we're supposed to do on the high holidays. The sages taught the following Braita. For 2.5 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed. This is a very, very famous story, by the way. You may have read it before. These say it would have been preferable had man not been created than to have been created. What are they arguing about, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai? Well, Beit Hillel says creating mankind was a big mistake. And Beit Hillel says it is preferable for man to have been created than had he not been created. So the argument here, just like we are looking at our own lives and saying, well, am I Kodesh or am I Chol this year? Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, a couple of thousand years ago, were asking themselves the same question about all of humanity. Was it good that God created us, or have we been a disappointment? Should God never have bothered? Ultimately, they were counted and concluded. So they had a vote. Who votes it was a mistake for God to create man? Who votes that it was a good idea? And they had a vote, and the vote was, it would have been preferable had man not been created than to have been created. It's not such a positive text. But, let's read on. Now that he has been created, he should examine his actions that he has performed and seek to correct them. Why is the Talmud saying this after it reports on the vote against man having been created? I think it's because the people in the room might say, look, mankind is terrible. We've done all sorts of bad things over the centuries, but it's not our fault. Why? Because God should never have created us in the first place. If he wouldn't have created us, all of these bad things wouldn't have happened. So there is the tendency, perhaps, or the inclination to blame God for everything wrong that happens in the world. But that's why immediately after reporting the results of the vote, they say, or they teach, but don't think that means you can blame God for everything bad in your life or everything bad that humankind has ever done. Now that God made the decision to create you, don't question God's wisdom. And it's your responsibility to examine your actions and seek to correct them. And some say he should scrutinize his planned actions and evaluate whether or not and in what manner those actions should be performed so that he will not sin. Now, this source in the Talmud is, I would say, the primary source for these days of awe being days of self-reflection of cheshbon hanefesh. Where does this idea come from? That on these days you're supposed to look at yourselves and your life and what you've done over the past year. It's this source. It's a fascinating thing that it's a source that comes out of the debate about whether mankind should have been created in the first place or not. Right? That's why, by the way, so many of the prayers on Selihot and on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are about how physically weak we are. How God created us with evil inclinations. This famous poem, right? Ki hine kachomer beyad hayotzer. We're nothing. We're just clay in the hands of God. It's out of that feeling of worthlessness that the rabbis insist that doesn't get you off the hook. I know you might feel worthless because we all have challenges in our personalities, in our lives, in our relationships. I know. And sometimes there's no easy answers to the challenges we face. But you can't just wipe your hands clean. You have a responsibility to reflect, to review, to think deeply about the choices you've made and how you might improve them in the future, perhaps. Now, what's interesting here is how this passage ends. Now that he's been created, he should examine his actions, and some say he should scrutinize his actions. What is the difference between examining your actions and scrutinizing your actions? And just to make you even more confused, let's look at the Hebrew. For those of you who can read the Hebrew, what is scrutinize and examine in the Talmud? Achshav shenivra yifashpesh b'ma'asav. Yifashpesh is examine, and some say yemashmesh. The word in English, scrutinize and examine, is even more disturbingly correlated in the Hebrew, yemashmesh, yepashpesh. What is the difference between yemashmesh and yepashpesh? Looking at your actions. So this is what we learn. It is Rabbi Moshe Chaim of Lutzato, the great ethicist in the 18th century, who says this is the difference between examining and scrutinizing. Pish push, yepash pesh b'ma'asav. That means looking at your actions, specifically everything that you're disappointed in. What are the actions you should look at in the past year? What are you supposed to do in the process of self-examination? Look at every time during the past year where you were disappointed in yourself. Reflect, consider, think about what went wrong. But Ramchal says, Yemashmesh, scrutinizing, is something different. To scrutinize doesn't mean just to look at every time you went wrong, things went wrong last year. You should look at every time things went right. Why? Why should we look at our good deeds? Shouldn't I be proud of everything that I've done? Well, here, Rav Amital brings the whole argument full circle. He reminds us there are those who do righteous, but they're not doing it to serve God. Yeah, you gave tzedakah, but why did you give it? Was it out of routine, or did you really reflect on the amount that you were giving, on where it was supposed to go to, on why tzedakah is important to you? Yeah, you lit candles on Friday night, but did you think in that moment about why you were lighting the candles, about the prayers that you had for your family in that particular week? Did you take a moment to get away from the routine of lighting candles every Friday night and think about why lighting tonight is different? That's Yemashmesh b'ma'asav, according to Rav Amital. Look at everything you've done in the past year, and you should be equally worried about the mitzvot that you did, the good deeds that you did, as much as you should be worried about the times you went wrong. In a way, when you've already recognized these were the times in the past year that I was disappointed in myself, you're already 90% of the way there. It all starts with vidui, confession, understanding, right? When you can admit to yourself that I didn't do my best, you're 90% of the way towards fixing yourself for the long run. The problem is when you can't recognize that what you've done might not be the best shade of yourself, that the good things that you've done weren't done for the right reasons and maybe were perceived by others in that way. Isn't that interesting? And he says that's the problem with routine Judaism. When you have mitzvot that you're commanded to perform, and as you grow older, you get more and more comfortable in the mitzvot that you've been performing and not doing the mitzvot that you've never performed, right? That comfort causes you to be blinded to living a righteous life without worshiping God. Isn't that crazy? A righteous life without worshiping God. Because, like a robot, you walk through the world and don't have time to look back, to step aside, to do things differently, to choose a new adventure in life, to give yourself a new perspective on the great things that you might be capable of doing if only you would step away from where you're comfortable. Mishmush is what Rabbi Luzzatto says we need to be doing during the days of awe. Looking not just at where things went wrong, but where things went right, and really asking. Now, I want to do one last source here, and then I'll explain, if it's not evident already, why I think this is a relevant lecture for this year. This is a beautiful ethical book called Pele Yoetz. And Rav Amital, 30 years ago when he gave this lecture, read from this book to his students. And as I'm reading it to you, I want you to think back at the biography that I read of his life. Not just his biography, but the way I explained his values, the kind of Judaism that he preached and believed in. This is what he felt was important for his students to reflect on before they went and daven Selihot. It is well known that God seeks to give merit to Israel, to the community, and to the individual. Thus, our sages must be very careful, especially on these days of awe, not to judge the people too critically, calling to mind their sins, God forbid. Rather, they should give proper instruction, and those who hear will understand. If you're a leader in the Jewish community and you see people doing things they shouldn't be doing, be careful criticizing them. Don't call to mind their sins. Give proper instruction. In other words, don't tell them what they're doing wrong. Tell them what the right thing is to do, and they'll know what you're talking about. You don't have to tell them, don't do this. Just tell them what to do, and they'll understand. And if you find yourself in shul, and you overhear people criticizing a fellow Jew, you should strengthen yourself and defend him, even if your defense isn't clear to you. So there's a guy in your town that everyone knows is a jerk. Everyone knows, even you know he's a jerk. And they're talking about him in shul. And you agree 100% with what everybody's saying about him. The advice is strengthen yourself. Defend him, even if you don't even believe in what you're saying. Say, for instance, and here's the advice he gives you, say, for instance, that everyone sins. Come on, nobody's perfect. Or that his poverty robbed him of good traits. Well, he didn't have good parents, right? Or exile robbed him of good traits. Or that he mixed with the nations and learned their ways. It's hard to live in Toronto, right? Or that he sinned accidentally. He didn't do it on purpose. He didn't know the difference between what is permitted and what is forbidden and what is permitted. In this way, you will judge each person favorably, and the one who judges others favorably, God will also judge her favorably. Rav Amital concluded his lecture saying, the same way you're supposed to look at yourself. Don't just look at the disappointments in the past year. Look at the things you did right. Reflect on those. He said you have to do the same thing for everybody else. There is no one out there who is just bad. Defend them. Come to their aid. Look at the good they did. Everyone has done some good. That's mishmush, scrutinizing your ways, taking time to see the good in every person. That's Motzei Shabbat, isn't it? Bein Kodesh Lechol. We're thrown out of our routine here to say, there's no such thing as Kodesh. No such thing as the person who's all holy. And no such thing as the person who's all profane. Here we are, and we're in between the beginning of a new week and the passing of the holiness of Shabbat. And we're in touch with the fact that life is complex. And people are complex. And if you don't know that about others, you at least know that about yourself. So when you're looking at your life in the past year, apply that appreciation for your own complexity and make sure that you apply the same to others. And then God will do the same for you. God won't look at you as Kodesh or Chol. God will understand that we are complex as individuals and as a community, and God will also seek to defend us, just like we defend others. Think, as I said, about why the circumstances of Rav Amital giving this message. Here he is in a yeshiva. Remember, I said he believed in his yeshiva that they should be dedicated to Torah learning and mitzvah observance, but the windows have to be open to the world. Do you read in these remarks the windows that are open to the world? Inside the ivory tower of the yeshiva, particularly in the 70s and 80s, Israeli society, secular society, looks like it's very distant from tradition. And it's very easy to criticize. And many yeshivas in Israel, back in his day and still today, look at secular Jews in Israel as chol. There's nothing Kodesh about them. They're totally. What does chol mean? Chol is how do you say secular in Israel? If you want to say I'm a secular Jew, I'm chilo. You never heard that? Chiloni. Israeli, that's from the word chol. So there's the tendency in some yeshivas to look at them as Kodesh. Here we are in the yeshiva, we're the holy ones, and they're the chilonim, they're chol. They're profane. Now do you see where Rav Amital is coming from in his remarks? Don't ever look at them like that. You have a responsibility to defend. Here's a Holocaust survivor saying, you defend the people. I could almost hear them saying, what do you expect from this nation after the terrible calamities that they've been through, that they don't challenge God, just like Malachi was challenging God in the time, not Malachi, but in the time of Malachi, the source we read. Why are we keeping the mitzvot? Why do we believe in God? We don't profit from this at all, and other people who are evil seem to prosper. This is all coming out of Rav Amital's life. The real hard words that people are speaking in his day, in the 70s and 80s in Israel, both from the religious Jews criticizing those who are secular and secular Jews who mock ritual observance among the yeshivas. And he builds, he builds this bridge. As I said, Shimon Peres hired him to build this bridge between religious and secular by eviscerating almost the idea that there's any difference between them. And that's what I think is so beautiful about this speech. There is no such thing as righteous and wicked. It doesn't exist. There are those who serve God. What does serve God mean? That means everything you do is with thoughtfulness, with intention, with reflection, with the desire to grow. And there are those who don't serve God. And they're in the yeshiva as much as they're out there on the streets of Tel Aviv. Because no matter what they're doing it because they're robots. They're doing it because it's habit. They find themselves just not thinking at all about what purpose or meaning there is to a day or a moment or their entire lives. That's what it means to live a religious life for Rav Amital. Not to see yourself as righteous or not righteous, but to see yourself as lo avado or avado. La'avod in Hebrew means what? Right. It's a beautiful idea. We're all working towards a relationship is something that needs work. And as long as you're working towards strengthening your relationship with God, right? Or understanding who you are as a person, if you're somebody who doesn't have a belief in God, as long as it's coming from real reflection and consideration, you are worshiping. You are serving God. Now, why did I choose this lecture this year? It's not because of frictions between the religious and secular in Israel. That's not why. It's not really because it's Rav Amital's yahrzeit, his 10th yahrzeit. I chose this lecture because I think this was a year where even if we didn't want to, the world threw us out of our routines. So many things that we used to do, that we used to enjoy, that we were comfortable with, we now have no choice but to change the way we went about things. And the most beautiful of insights for so many of us came about. I wonder if any of you had those insights in the past 6 months. Maybe one day you said, you know what, I don't mind being at home so much. It's nice to be here with family. Maybe you phoned people a little bit more, spent more time on the phone with people that you were too busy to speak to before the pandemic. Maybe there were a lot of things that you took for granted, and because of the way the world has changed, you have a greater appreciation for them. And I can add on that list over and over and over again how breaking away from the routine has helped us, I think most of us, have a year of great insight. And frankly, I don't really have to give this lecture because I could have just told you, didn't we all learn this year how dangerous routines are? You all can give that lecture yourselves, I'm guessing. I could go around the box on the Zoom screen over here and ask each one of you to tell me how breaking away from the routine of life helped you realize or achieve something positive that was unexpected. Next year we'll do that lecture. I won't have to go into the technicalities. We'll just talk, and you can each share. He was living before a pandemic, Rav Amital, but this was something that he learned from Jewish sources, something that he believed in firmly. If you can just understand that we live all of our life walking in the narrow space between Kodesh and Chol, between Shabbat and the rest of the week, that's where we need to be, in no man's land. Particularly during this time of self-reflection, then these days of awe will truly be meaningful and important for all of us to grow. And that's the point, isn't it? So thank you all for your attention. I hope you learned something and have some new insights on Judaism that can help make these high holidays meaningful. You know, it's going to be a different high holidays this year. You all know that. But again, separating from the routine, doing things a little differently. High holidays have been done the same way here pretty much for 50 years. Doing things a little differently has helped us, I think, grow as a congregation in wisdom, in accessibility. There are many things that we're going to do different this year that I bet you are going to stick with us long after this pandemic is over, because we just prefer things. The world got shaken up and we made some changes, and some of them are good. We should have all of our lectures, for instance, broadcast on Zoom so people don't have to schlep here. Right? It's one of the insights that we've gained that we never would have come to unless we stepped away from the routine and tried to do things a little bit differently. And this Selihot too will be a little bit different. So don't be disappointed. Just be open to what you might learn from a Selihot service that will be a bit different this year. Okay, thanks everyone. So we have a 10-minute break now before the service begins. And remember that the service, for those of you who are joining from home, is not going to be on Zoom. It's on the live stream link. So that link was sent out on the email on Friday morning. And it's the same way that you view services on the sanctuary. You view services from the sanctuary on Saturday morning. But what's interesting tonight is, here we go, we're trying new things. Tonight is the first day we're going to have multiple cameras in the sanctuary. So we're going to test out what the service might look like on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with multiple cameras. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing whether that enhances our service. So we've got a whole television production studio across the hall. Thanks again for your attention. K'tiva v'chatima tova. Good year for everyone.